Hello, C3RF members from across the nation. It's with great pleasure today that we give you another in-hot session. And today we're particularly fortunate to have with us C3RF patron Christine Douglas Williams is with us today. By way of introduction, let me just cut away to a short blurb on our website. You can see there that Christine is a patron of C3RF, and she's an award-winning broadcast journalist, past Canadian federal appointee as a director with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation in the Heritage Department, and external advisor in the Office of Religious Freedoms. She has served on the board of governors for the Gatestone Institute. She is the author of The Challenge of Modernizing Islam, commissioned by Dr. Daniel Pipes and the Middle East Forum, and also her book Fired by the Canadian Government for Criticizing Islam. That's a pretty interesting topic there. Commissioned by Frank Gaffney and the Center for Security Policy. Christine is a regular writer for Jihad Watch, associate editor at Front Page Magazine, and public affairs and media consultant for the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, Canada. Now, before we cut to Christine, I'd like to say a very much thank you, a very big thank you to Madeline Welch. She's a founding member and board director with C3RF, and she is sponsoring this session of In Hot with Christine. So I'll stop the share there. And Christine, welcome aboard. It's so great to have you with us today. This is it's really good to see you. And how are things on your end?
Russ, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me on your program. It's a real privilege, and it's wonderful to finally, well, meet you in person.
And it is a real pleasure for myself as well. Now, Christine, you are really a prolific writer, and I wanted to kick off this session with one of your articles that I read within the past little while, and I'm going to cut away to it. This one talks about, it's from Canada, a Catholic student who was suspended for opposing gender ideology is now arrested by police. That's under your byline, Christine Douglas Williams. And down here we can see that the teen, I believe he's 17 years old, told LifeSite News that he believes, in accordance with Catholic teaching and the Bible, that there are only two sexes. Under the freedom of religion, Alexander, his name is Josh Alexander, has the guaranteed right to affirm this, or so we thought. Now, this is an incredible story where all of a sudden we find ourselves in Canada where you almost have to worship this new God that's out there, this woke entity that cannot be debated or discussed. What do you think of this kind of a development in Canada?
From the point of view of Josh, it is a sad situation that this boy is being targeted and bullying by his own school, one that goes under the umbrella of a Catholic school, and is in fact, we're looking at religious freedoms here, bullying of the young boy that should not be bullied, religious freedoms, because what is going on here? Christians have a viewpoint, and they should be able to express that viewpoint. Christians do not come out and advocate for the attack of the transgender community or the attack of the gay community or anybody for that matter, but they do have their viewpoints. And under Canada's religious rights and freedoms, we are entitled as citizens to say, look, Christians believe in marriage between one man and one woman, and we believe that God created two genders, male and female. That is not hate speech, one bit. No. So we are being deprived of our right to be believers in Christianity. Now, there are other faiths that also hold to that belief. So one has to ask the question, which is much larger than Josh. He happens to be the student that is bearing a burden he shouldn't have to bear. One has to ask the question, what is the state of religious rights and freedoms in Canada? And for those who choose to be silent and say, look, it's not going to come to our back door, it has already come to our back door. It is now in our schools. Schools are now reported to even be hosting certain shows with the transgender community that if one looks at the straight community, let's suppose a woman decides to go on stage in front of children dressed in some of the clothing that we see the transgender community parading before children, will that be allowed? No, it would not be allowed. So why is it being allowed for the transgender community? We do not
Yeah.
oppose their rights, but come on, people. What
Yeah.
about Christian rights and freedoms as well?
It seems like there seems to be a hierarchy here of rights that certain ideas, certain ideologies, maybe certain religions have more rights than others. I noticed that in your article, you actually wrote to the bishop who's responsible for that area, and I was really surprised with his response. Basically, you say, you talk about ignoring things or just standing aside and letting them happen. I was surprised by his response to you. Could you elucidate on what he said?
I don't have his response right in front of me. You probably have it, but I will say that his response was rather polite, rather political. It was an expression of, yes, the message was, yes, he understands my query. He showed sympathies toward Josh, but when asked about the situation that's going on in the school and what about even the diocese, he was quick to say, well, it's not really up to the diocese, so to speak, it's up to the trustees. So he moved right into the realms of red tape. And again, that begs the question, why is the Catholic School Board under a religious entity when it comes to funding if they are basically subject to bureaucratic red tape and they're not even willing to stand by their own principles of which is advertised on their webpage and on their in their so-called values. They want parents and funders to believe that it is a safe space for students. And the fellow went so far as to say that, look, he believes that the values will come through and something will be done one way or another. And but nothing is being done, you see. In fact, it got worse since I first contacted this diocese. It got to the point where the boy was suspended for the rest of the year. So clearly nothing is being done. You've got this woke brigade that is standing over the entire religious institution here and proclaiming that woke identity politics is now the new established way of that particular Catholic school, and chances are every Catholic school. Russ, I don't know if you also read that out in Calgary, the same thing happened in Saskatoon. There was a case of naked men that identified as women that went into areas of girls' pools where the girls were changing, their change rooms. And where do you draw the line? There is no line whatsoever. There is no common sense. There is just violation of women's rights, violation of children's rights, and frankly, child abuse as we see it.
Yes, and you talk about Josh standing up for what he believes in. He seems to be on his own. You see where the bishop isn't helping him. I don't see any politicians standing or coming forward. I don't see his political representative in the run-through area coming forward, and I'm a bit surprised with that because Cheryl Gallant is no shy person in expressing herself when she chooses to do so. But aside from that, we do seem, I recall, back in 1969, go back a little ways, long before your time, Christine.
That's what you think.
when the Justice Minister of the day, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, he famously stated that the state has no place in the bedrooms of the nation. But things seem to have progressed to the point where now the bedrooms of the nation are now being imposed upon us at our kitchen tables, in our schools, and it seems like if we squawk about it, we get canceled and we get done under by this woke new woke ideology. Absolutely incredible.
You said something very important, Russ. You talked about politicians not standing up for him. There's a pattern that I think everyone has noticed. When anything happens in Canada or anywhere in a lot of other countries that go under the globalist umbrella, when something happens to an individual that garners any media attention whatsoever, there is an outcry. Politicians stand up for that person and use that person as an example. We see it a lot. I mean, if you go over to the States and you look at some of the cases that CARE represents and stands for, some of them that turned out to be bogus accusations of victimhood that never happened in the first place. That is one example, but I'll tell you, something is very wrong in Canada when it comes to the politicians that should be standing up for what is right and standing up for Canada's democracy. It seems like few politicians are willing to actually be servants of the people. And you really have to ask the serious question, not to sound like I'm being judgmental or pontificating, but it comes to a point where politicians need to be asked, do you really care about the country? Do you really care about the citizens that you claim to serve? How do you look at yourself in the mirror at night? When we look at what the woke movement is willing to proclaim, is willing to do, the rights that are being violated, they don't hesitate to stand up for those who represent their own so-called values, no matter how obscene they are, no matter what they are. But somehow in the camp that supposed to or proclaims Christianity or proclaims to stand up for Judeo-Christian democracy, there is a disgusting silence, and in fact, sometimes an agreement. And I don't mean just by silence, just by saying, okay, we're going to jump on the bandwagon. And I'm going to use an example. Like, I don't want to deviate too much, but I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But there needs to be a challenge to our politicians. Who are you really standing for? Is it yourself and your political gains, or is it really for the country? Do you even care about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and what it represents? And everybody that's coming through Canada, everybody, and I'm talking everybody, not just certain groups. The Liberals try to say, well, they represent diversity. Nobody could be less diverse than the Liberals. They only respect one view and one view alone, and they give preference to one faith belief alone and call it a race. Nobody could be less diverse than them. But when you look at Canadians, and I'm not talking one race, I'm talking all races collectively, are we as a country really being represented? What about the abuses being committed in foreign countries and those who escaped those abuses and love the country? They're not given a voice. Their voices are absent from the battle between the woke activists and the other side that's supposed to be fighting for us that really rolls over and plays dead because they're afraid of that so-called war or even the battle for the soul of this nation.
Yeah, you really have to wonder where politicians are coming from, because and you're talking about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I mean, over the past 3 years with COVID, I mean, and now we're talking about having an experience a year ago with the invocation of the Emergencies Act. It seems like the charter is not even there. It's not even a consideration anymore. It's just kind of a real paper tagger. And along those political lines, I want to cut away to another one of your articles here. And this one is about Canada and the government trying to get back $122,000 from an anti-racism group that hired a virulent anti-Semite. And I just highlighted this here. The Globe and Mail article states that, this is your writing, the Globe and Mail article states that the anti-racism consultant Layouth Marouf made derogatory statements about Jewish, white supremacists, francophones, and Black and Indigenous public figures. But Marouf was far more than derogatory, specifically towards Jews. I'll just stop the share there.
Yeah,
and what do we have? The government is actually funding these types of hate issues, hate organizations. And now they've been reduced to the point where they have to actually go to a debt collector to try to get the money back. This is incredible.
Ross, they're only going to the debt collector because it got blown wide open. Laith Marouf came right out and said specifically about white Jews that they were a loudmouth, quote, I'm quoting him here, bag of human feces. And he went so far as to say they deserve a bullet to the head. Okay, this kind of, I cannot imagine the outcry internationally if that was said about Muslims or about Blacks. I cannot imagine the outcry. Why is this being allowed? Now, CJ pointed out, and I have it in that article as well, either in that article or in another one associated, because I did a few and I put click here for the background. CJ pointed out that there's a problem in the Heritage Department when it comes to funding these types. And that has been discovered on several occasions. And if you look at the articles on Jihad Watch that I covered, you'll see that pattern. Now, to try to go back and recover what? It's basically pittance, what they're trying to recover when you consider the amount of different organizations that the Heritage Department is funding. And I'll go back to M103.
Yeah.
You'll remember us, and you were one of the voices that opposed it. And it wasn't because we're being Islamophobic. First of all, one has to ask, what is the definition of Islamophobia? Now, the NCCM was very much involved in trying to craft that definition of Islamophobia during an Islamic Heritage Month with the Toronto District School Board. And they talked about hatred and dislike of Islamic politics and of Islam, and that was included. Yes. And how could you say that? I mean, human rights defenders would say, well, so you're trying to say that if Iran was pointed out for what it's doing with human rights abuses, Saudi Arabia, I mean, these are main countries here. This isn't one or two people that we're talking about that are human rights abusers. You're looking at Turkey. And that's become more and more Islamized under Erdogan, where freedoms have diminished because it was once deemed a secular society. But you're looking at Iran, which is the top of the bunch when it comes to human rights violations. And you're looking at which is Shia Islam. And I try to talk about this particular point about Shia Islam because a lot of people try to say, well, we don't support Iran. But if you think about the role of Iran, which is basically the keeper of Shia Islam, and the Ayatollah Khamenei, he is actually considered a marja, which is the tops when it comes to Shia Islam, the top representative. The only thing higher than a marja is actually the Quran itself. So this is the keeper of Shia Islam here. It's not just some a person or a group of people. It's a nation representing Shia Islam. Saudi Arabia, a nation representing Sunni Islam. Turkey, the same thing. You look at Pakistan, they're notorious, infamous is a better word for their blasphemy laws and the way they treat Christians in that country and the way they publicly lynch people. So you ask yourself the question, what is going on here with this whole Islamophobia game? How is it Islamophobic to dislike certain elements in Islam? So there was an outcry, and B'nai B'rith was to be credited for that because they kind of came forward and they said, look, how could you say this as a definition of Islamophobia? But as usual, the issue just kind of died. And it went along, the same Islamophobia subterfuge, I call it, went along until M103 came to being. And I kept on saying again and again, watch M103. It's not going to stop there because motions form the basis for future laws, and money goes behind it. Now, if you look at what came of M103 right after, there was a document that emerged where $23 million backed this document. Now, they packaged Islamophobia behind an entire anti-racism efforts, and Islam is not a race. So the bottom line is they created a situation and a document where to criticize Islam ended up being Islamophobic. And you look at where monies are going, and that goes back to what we were discussing before that. A lot of that money, I mean, Iqra Khalid, who tabled the motion, she came right out on TAG TV and said that the NCCM was one of the recipients of funds to forward the plan of the Liberal government to fight these anti-racism ventures that they had in mind. Another one was Irfan, who was designated a terrorist entity under the Conservative government. So we saw a pattern building. We saw tens of millions of Canadian dollars, and more went into anti-racism efforts, by the way, and it isn't transparent who's getting what. People don't know. So that 23 million, it's way more than that. If you do some digging, you start to see more and more tens of millions mounted into these various ventures of the government, and Trudeau is behaving as if that's his own personal money. It's hard-earned taxpayer money. I mean, there are those who really support Canada, love its history, love the strides that it's made in human rights, celebrate the country, celebrate the country's unity, and they can't even pay for meds for their kids. And they have to sit there and witness the woeful disregard for our country and the slap in the face to Canadians, calling them Islamophobic, where they have to pay a price for being Islamophobic. Canada is not an Islamophobic country.
We never
not Islamophobic.
We never did get a definition. I remember petitioning.
Well, we did get one. That's the problem, Russ. We got one from the NCCM in the school.
Yes. Okay.
That is the problem.
But it's so broad, and it, as you say, any criticism whatsoever of any aspect of Islam, and Islam, is certainly a religion, but it has certain political overtures within it as well. When you talk about Sharia law, but you can't discuss those issues. You can't debate them. You can't discuss if they're relevant to Canada and Canada's Western liberal democracy. None of that can be approached because you immediately get wokeified, you
Russ,
get canceled.
Russ, I'll tell you about the whole definition of Islamophobia. It comes from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. They have an Islamophobia observatory, and they have defined it. And they defined it in two ways. One is genuine bigotry against Muslims, and I abhor that. I remember our kids going to school, and some of their friends were girls who wore hijabs, and you had some of the bullies that will come and pull off the hijab. That needs to be fought. All bullying needs to be fought. It's not one group. It's bullying is something that needs to be fought, period. So anti-Muslim bigotry is one part of Islamophobia, and we can just simply say anti-Muslim bigotry. The other part that the OIC discusses is whatever is offensive to Muslims, whatever is hurtful to Muslims, and therein lies the problem. Because under the Sharia, you just don't criticize Islam.
No,
it's a very it's a stringent belief. Politics is part of the Sharia, and you cannot separate the two in normative Islam.
Yeah. Now the other thing about M103 was, the other disparaging thing I found was the fact that it made the straight up statement that Canada is systemically racist and it's full of religious discriminators. And I thought, how could that possibly be in a country that welcomes people from all over the world, any kind of race, creed, stripe, doesn't matter. You're welcome to Canada. Come on and help us build the country. But the government itself, with that motion, basically, I thought was in itself expressing racist tendency to paint all Canadians with the same bigoted brush. You're all systemically racist. You're all religious discriminators. And then, of course, on top of that, it singled out Islam as the one religion that needed to be protected the most, I guess. But now we find this. I find it very interesting that this whole concept of systemic racism has blossomed within Canada to cover almost every aspect of life, and now we're in a perennial state of atonement. And if you're Canadian in Canada these days, you're having to atone for, I don't know, residential schools. You're having to apologize for all kinds of things that happened in the past, and no credit can be given to the fact that Canadians as a people overcame those issues and worked their way out of them and became a better nation for it. So this whole M103 thing for me was kind of a pivot point where the new government came in and boom, 2015, 2 years later, 2017, we approved motion M103. And then in that same time period, you find yourself in hot water. You find yourself in hot water because you were a board member at the Canadian Race Relations Foundation since 2012. And now all of a sudden you were called up in the rug to be pilloried, the way I saw it, by the government itself. What happened?
I was writing a lot about M103 at that time.
Yes.
I found out, and I saw the report is in there, that Rebel Media did a Freedom of Information, and they uncovered a letter that came out of the Heritage Department from one person to another. And the title was Minister's Office Emergency, Christine Douglas Williams.
Oh, wow.
So that should tell you something. I'll send it to you afterward, Russ. I'll send that document to you because Rebel has it up on their site.
Wow.
And in those documents came the order to investigate all of her speeches and writings. And when you go back to that time that I was being investigated, I received a request from the Deputy Minister of Heritage at the time. And at first I thought, okay, what's this about? So I accepted, but then I refused it because I thought, no, anything the Deputy Minister of Heritage has to say, let him put it in writing. Fast forward this, I get this long letter registered, delivered to my house from Melanie Jolie.
Okay.
And it points out all this, the quotes that I said that were considered Islamophobic when it's in my book, actually, Fired by the Government of Canada for Criticizing Islam.
Yes.
And if you go through those points, you'll realize none of it is Islamophobic. And I'm thinking, okay, I see your quotes. Where's the problem?
Yeah.
These are warnings that need to be taken serious. What really caused the big problem, and this also happened, well, you may have been, have at least heard about it when Jasmine Zine, who wrote this big Islamophobia report, she came to an event, Canadians for the Rule of Law, and during my speech, she tied it up and started to quote me saying that Muslims may smile at you, but that is not an indicator that they're being necessarily friendly. I did not say that. My words were Islamic supremacists. Okay. Not all Muslims ascribe to the Sharia and Islamic supremacy. And yes, the argument comes, well, they're not real Muslims. No, you can't say that, because if you look at the Old Testament and look at the stoning for sins, I'm not going to be so brazen to go out and say, well, you're not a Jew because you don't believe in stoning people for sins. Jews just don't do that. So if a Muslim, I don't care personally. And according to our rights and freedoms, a person is free to worship a light bulb. It doesn't matter. Just be free, just be peaceful, and follow the law. So she's misquoting me here. I did not say Muslims. She was very disruptive. And when she was asked to leave with a firm voice, she wouldn't leave. No laws were broken whatsoever. And no charges were laid. A police investigation was done. But she writes this long piece about Canadians for the rule of law being racist and so forth. But you see, this is the kind of a strategy used. When I was in Iceland on a speaking engagement with Robert Spencer, and that's when he got poisoned there. What a lot of people don't know is that there was a vehicle that tried to run us over in the parking lot as well.
Okay, yes.
Okay, that didn't come out.
That. Yeah.
Yes, that also happened on that particular trip. It was awful what they tried to do. The entire riot squad came out, and we had a personal guard, a bodyguard, but that clearly, if you look at what happened afterward, he doesn't have 10 eyes and 10 hands. Somebody slipped something in Robert's drink and he was poisoned.
Yes.
So what I was warning about is Muslim Brotherhood stealth tactics. I was warning the West, not everybody who smiles at you politely and sweet is your friend. There are cultures, there are people who could smile at you, give you a handshake, and they're not your friend. This is the ABCs of what we teach children about safety, for goodness sakes. You don't talk to a stranger and because they smile at you and give you candy, believe everything they tell you. For the sake of safety, you have to be very careful with strangers, be very careful. And when one looks at what is declared in the Muslim Brotherhood Memorandum, and what was also discovered in the project, and that was found in the Al-Qaeda Maghreb, and what was so disturbing about it, it was that it was attached to Al-Qaeda, who was not deemed sophisticated, but at the highest levels, there was no differentiation between Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood. When you look at that document, the project, it talks about exactly how to infiltrate every democracy, every village, every institution, and you do it by mimicking the values and the persona of the people that you're infiltrating. So my message was, be very careful. There happened to be also a imam that came to that event that was disruptive, and it turned out later that he denied the London Bridge attack and said it was all staged. That same imam, he was funded by Saudi Arabia, and there he was making trouble, because I was warning about his type that comes out, these types that are not for the West. When I say type, I am not referring to all Muslims. I am referring to the enemies of democracy who are out to subvert you. Be very careful who you shake hands with. The Muslim Brotherhood is not your friend. Neither are people who will protect an ideology that is causing extreme human rights abuse in this world.
I think
persecution, and that is what I got in trouble for being Islamophobic.
Yeah, I think your book, Modernizing Islam, addresses the point very succinctly. You do make a big differentiation between reformist Muslims, moderate Muslims, and Islamists or supremacists who look at Sharia law as the way that they want to take things, even in the political sphere. So that goes all the way back to this whole Islamophobia canard. What is it, and how it's being used to stifle our free speech rights is certainly something that has yet to be discussed, I think, in this country.
Russ, I don't have a problem standing on a stage and discussing this. If one looks, even from the point of view of a company, and let's say you are the CEO of a company, and there is a problem going on among your staff, my view is the best way is to pull various staff members in and let's have a discussion about what is wrong. Those who do not want to sit at that table are the problems. Those who do not want to sit at the table and discuss. They're not the ones who believe in truth. They have something to hide. They do not believe in diverse discussion and openness. Now, let's suppose I have something in me that shouldn't be there and somebody points out is wrong. I don't have a problem with that because we should be willing to change. So why is it that we can't stand and have an open discussion about these issues in public forums without being slapped across the face and called Islamophobic? One kid creates the worst crime, runs down a family of 4 Muslims, and the whole country gets indicted for that. And for goodness sakes, we have conservatives that went on board, just jumped right in with the liberals with this Islamophobia nonsense and betrayed Canadians by going along that we have a problem when it comes to Islamophobia. We have to have an emergency Islamophobia summit. There are laws in this land. There are laws, innocent until proven guilty, motive needs to be established, and so forth. This guy, 19-year-old Veltman, Nathaniel Veltman, they said at the beginning he belonged to no particular group. We don't know what drove him because all discussions of his crime, by the way, were shut down. Information was banned ahead of the summit. There was another case where a Muslim ran over 2 cops, 1 died. Northrop in Toronto, that was also banned, information from that ahead of this Islamophobia summit. What is wrong with people in our country? Various powers that be said what they were going to do. I blame Canadians for allowing it to happen so easily. Why are we doing this to ourselves and to our ancestors and the various people that fought so bravely for the freedoms of everybody, including Muslim women who get abused? What is wrong with these politicians? Have they absolutely no loyalty or conscience?
It really is insulting when you think about it, because when you take an individual incident, like the London affair, and you blow it up and you paint all Canadians and the whole country with the same brush of bigotry, isn't that itself racism? Isn't that itself bigotry? Isn't that itself exactly the same thing that they're accusing?
It's the same tactics they're opposing. And if you look at globally at what jihad is causing, for instance, the jihad against Christians in Nigeria, which is actually now genocide, and what's going on in the Middle East, that's another genocide. When you look at that, when you look at jihad attacks, when you look at the threat of jihad, when you look at the Muslim Brotherhood, those are major problems. But to even criticize it, we're called Islamophobes. However, one kid commits a crime and the whole country is being called Islamophobe. So if you even call out the wing of Islam that is a threat, you're being called all kinds of names and being called racist. If you want to manage your borders, you're being called racist. For advocating for responsible immigration. We're not anti-immigrant, but we're for responsible immigration. But my big question is, where is the politician? Where are the politicians who are supposed to be representing us?
Well, let's take a look at another cutaway here. I think this leads right into this this next article of yours, because we're talking about this one is a backlash over Trudeau's special representative to combat Islamophobia. Now we're talking about, where are the Canadians when all of Canada, all Canadians get lambasted with this Islamophobic canard or racist canard. And now we see in Quebec, at least, there is a backlash starting to form because of this new representative, Amira El-Gawabi. And it says here the appointment is not being received with the welcome Trudeau might have expected. Already headlines such as these have lit up the media circuit. Trudeau wants Amira El-Gawabi to clarify remarks about Quebecers. Legault government wants anti-Islamic advisor removed over Bill 21 comments. Now, it looks like she's getting into trouble because she's made these overarching wide sweeping accusations against the people of Quebec. And the people of Quebec, for one, are beginning to stand up, whereas maybe the rest of Canada is not there yet, but Quebec is, quite frankly, it looks like they've had enough.
Quebec did, and they should, and so should all Canadians, because we don't need an Islamophobia czar in our country. If anything, we need a Christian czar, because Christians aren't even allowed to come out and discuss their beliefs. Yes. Aren't even allowed to discuss their beliefs without being dubbed hate mongers. One of the first things that Trudeau did when he came into power was shut down the Office of Religious Freedoms.
Yes.
And that is too bad, because we need religious freedoms for everybody, not for one group. But in terms of czars, if anybody, Christians need it, because we're not allowed to have a view.
Well,
why do we need Islamophobia czar? It's ridiculous.
I'm thinking about over the course of the last 3 years, when you look at COVID restrictions, Christians didn't fare too well. We got pastors and ministers thrown into jail, sometimes without bail. I'm thinking specifically of Pulowski in Alberta, in Calgary. He's still dealing with
yes.
these kind of legal challenges.
Now, I wonder, were mosques scrutinized the same manner? Are you willing to say that?
I haven't seen one case. I haven't seen one case of imam being thrown into jail for having a service. But
I mean, I'm asking this question, the royal you. Are you, anybody watching, willing to put your head on the block, as they used to once say, and say that there are no imams in this country that had any gatherings like Christians did?
Yeah.
Not one.
I find it hard to believe.
I find that hard to believe myself. So Christians were being picked on. If anybody needs a czar, it's Christians.
Yes.
And we need a woman czar too, a female czar to look after women's rights, because we now have males who identify as females with everything hanging out in the nude, coming into female spaces, including little girls. We need a czar. And what about the invasion of female sports? How do we compete against testosterone? Women need a czar. Christians need a czar. Everybody needs a czar.
I think the Office of Religious Freedom, like you say, needs to make a comeback here. And
for everybody's rights. Yes.
You were in that office, I believe.
I was, yes. I was an external advisor, so I was an appointee, a formal appointee in the Foreign Affairs Department to the Office of Religious Freedom on Andrew Bennett's team. He was very much a man of religious freedoms, and I'll tell you, he still is. And I'll tell you one thing, he was one of the first voices in the country that came out and said that Trudeau is showing, we've come a long way since then, totalitarian tendencies, because you'll remember the summer funding program for schools. If you didn't state openly that you supported abortion, you weren't cleared for government funding. And he came out and said, what? So what happens to Catholic schools that have well, back then, they had some kind of respect. Now they're not even standing up for their principles. But he was one of the first that noted that, and that made news everywhere, that that word, totalitarian tendencies. Now people are coming right out and calling Trudeau totalitarian, period. Not even tendencies anymore.
Around the world, they're calling him a totalitarian. We see that another instance where Christine Anderson, a member of the European Parliament, is doing a tour of Canada. And what a kerfuffle that has created, because all of a sudden we have these accusations of her being a Nazi. As far as I know, you can't even be a Nazi in Germany anymore. It's illegal.
Russ, I think it's a very important topic to discuss what happened with Christine Anderson. I don't know how much time you have.
Oh, we got a few more minutes.
Okay, I'll try to sum this up very quickly. First of all, many people have said, and I agree, I have not ever heard Christine Anderson say anything that was derogatory at all against anybody in terms of their race. She has been overt when it comes to open door immigration, which is prudent. Anybody who supports open door immigration, I give them a personal challenge. Leave your front doors open. No matter where you live, leave your front doors open for anybody to come in anytime, and we'll see how that goes for you. Yep. Okay, so she has not said anything about that. There have been accusations against the party. Those people were dealt with, as far as I know, and she has never advocated for that, and those people were marginalized within that party. Now, there's another fellow, Diagolon, the founder, Jeremy McKenzie. He said terrible things about Poilievre's wife, which I think could have caused Poilievre to react that way, which was very unfair to Christine Anderson. Now, I don't know if you, Russ, know what he has said.
Pierre?
No, not Pierre. This fellow from this McKenzie fellow.
Yeah, Diagolon. I've seen some of his sayings.
He has said vile, dangerous, threatening things that I won't even repeat here.
Yeah.
So
I'm familiar. Yeah.
This lady that came in, how would she know the history? In fact, if Pierre Poilievre didn't even know the history of that prominent party that Christine Anderson came from, why would she be expected to know a small organization that wasn't even heard of before the scandal with Pierre Poilievre's wife?
Yes.
So the treatment of Poilievre toward her, I think, was really unfair. And it's too bad because he did support the truckers.
Yes.
And I think really that he should really come out and apologize, because nothing is worse. And I've been at that end where I was defamed, I was slandered, called Islamophobic. I certainly don't hate anybody. I certainly don't hate Muslims. I would advocate for Muslims, peaceful Muslims, any day. It bothered me when the kids came home and talked about their friend's hijab being pulled. These things bother me. So I think the way he treated her was very much how the left treats people. And it would go a long way if he came out and apologized, because there was a big mistake made there. Christine Anderson is not a racist. She has been a hero in Europe for those who advocate for responsible immigration and to pay attention to what's going on with some of these mosques that have been proven to be spreading hate. Yes. And the jihad. So that was a big mistake.
I see real parallels here between your own experience and the experience of Christine Anderson here in Canada, with being lambasted out of hand with these egregious accusations with no supporting evidence. It's I must say I hope Pierre does come out and address this, because I think
and he's got a point.
He's really treated her unfairly, and right. I think Leslyn Lewis, to her credit, Leslyn Lewis, boy, she came out swinging, saying, hey, you don't tell me about what's racist or not when your own prime minister is running around blackface and has got no problem with it.
Exactly. Exactly.
She seems to be the only one speaking out.
She is, but it's a messy business. But truth will prevail, and politicians need to have the backbone to be able to stand up, know what the truth is, express what the truth is. Poilievre had a reason to be upset on one hand. On the other hand, he took it way too far. We need truth. We need true leadership in this country, not more politicking. We've seen that enough with the Trudeau campaign.
True leadership is hard to come by. It's
very hard.
I look for it all the time, and I must say in Canada, on the Canadian scene, it's very hard to see any of it. I see in the States there are a couple of examples, and I look at Ron DeSantis, who I think is very interesting because he's come out against the woke ideology. He says that woke goes to Florida to die, and he's kind of walked the walk on it. He's taken on Disney. He's calm about it. He's taken on the colleges. He's taken on the universities when it comes to these diversity, inclusion, and equity programs. And guess what? He won his first election as governor with about 32,000 votes. The last election in November, he won with 1.3 million.
This is what Canada needs.
There's a market out here for the truth. This is what
Canada needs. Watch DeSantis if you want to know how to do it.
Mm-hmm. There is a market for the truth in Canada. I think Canadians have a unending thirst for truth. I think it's been submerged for quite a while. I've seen since, I started writing back in 2017 with M103. What's that? That's 6 years now. Holy mackerel! That's a lot longer than I thought. But it's my experience, and the response I get is that there's a large contingent of Canadians out there that they're keeping their heads down, but they're not happy.
Can I give you one more line with that M103?
Yep.
That provided the groundwork for C11. That provided the information, because M103, that document that came forth, talked specifically about law enforcement and about, quote, monitoring citizens for compliance.
Yes.
When we look at C11, it came from that. We were shut down, our speech, under M103. That formed the basis. And now we are seeing an advance of that. And it will only get worse unless somebody says enough. We need to have open discussions in our country.
I think, like I said before, M103 I see as a pivot point. I see it as the cornerstone of the Trudeau government.
Yes.
Because out of it comes the money, the millions that are going against these anti-racism campaigns.
Absolutely.
Who knows where that money is going? And it just goes on into legislation like C11. They're talking about another bill coming out to specifically address hate speech online that would basically reinstate Section 13 from the old Canadian Human Rights Code, which the Harper government got rid of. That looks like it's in their sights to have that come back as well. M103 is the cornerstone, I think.
Yes, it is, and that was under that document as well. Online monitoring, online and offline hate.
Yeah,
it was there too. Yes.
Oh my goodness. What
A
I want to
privilege, Russ.
what I want to do. I know we've got to go, but what I want to do is I want to share a screen and just throw your books up, just so people can have a look and see what they look like. Here is The Challenge of Modernizing Islam. Is out there. You can see it's under Amazon here. Looks like both hardcover, softcover, Kindle, and that I find is an extremely informative read, because you get to see more than when you talk about Islam. It is anything but monolithic. There's a lot to it,
Yes.
and there's a lot there that you know, Canadians and Muslims share in common when it comes to worship. And the other one is, this is fired by the Canadian government. This is a must read, because it is an extremely interesting story on how you were basically drummed out of the Canadian government for your thoughts and ideas.
I saw it was building. I expected it, frankly.
Well,
I saw it coming. The writing was on the wall.
That's
But I wasn't going to quit.
story.
I wasn't going to quit.
Absolutely incredible story. So with that, Christine, thanks so much for joining us on In Hot. This has been, I've had a really good time.
So did I, Russ.
Very enjoyable.
Thank you for that.
Okay, and all the best to you in the future.
And you too.